Hey, let's talk autistic history and the Autism Wars. This is part 11 of a series. We are now in the 90s, and the explosion of parent-founded autism organizations is just happening throughout this whole decade. There's just a lot of activity, just a ton of it. So at this point, I'm going to share with you an introduction to a series I started writing about titled Inventing and then cashing in on the autism epidemic. This is where we have some incredible history that really we need to understand what happened then so we can better advocate against the powers that be now for a better way. So the introduction I am going to share with you here is also available in text version on internationalbadassactivist.org, and you can just click from the front page on Inventing and then Cashing in on the Autism Epidemic, and it should take you to the intro here that I'm about to share. All right, with that, let's get started. Yeah. Remember the autism epidemic predicted in the late 90s? Autism was touted as a public health crisis by non-autistic founders of autism organizations and parent advocates. Autism wasn't a commonly known diagnosis in that era, and most folks' experience of autism was from watching the 1988 movie Rain Man, starring Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. So, the year before the movie was released, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM, criteria for autism drastically evolved. For the first time, it included pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, or PDD-NOS. And it removed the 30-month onset requirement. Autism was first presented as a spectrum of conditions in the DSM-4 back in 1994, and it was revised again in 2000. So throughout the 1990s, researchers had hoped to identify genes. Been leaning on that cheek. Anyhow, throughout the 1990s, researchers had hoped to identify genes that contributed to autism. After the Human Genome Project was completed in 2003, many studies tried very hard, they did try, to zero in on a list of autism genes. And they found hundreds, but could not link any exclusively. So when it became obvious that finding the genetics involved and corresponding treatments wasn't possible, experts made a choice to characterize autism in an all-inclusive diagnosis that ranged from mild to severe. The 2000s saw a sharp uptick in autism prevalence. This gave the impression that clinicians lack consistency in the diagnostic process, and that they may have been swayed by parents angling for a diagnosis or influenced by services available in their state. With a fervor, most parent advocates believed differently. They insisted that more autistics were being born today than ever before, and the surge wasn't due to an evolving understanding of autism and the criteria change in the DSM. No, they were convinced something insidious must be causing the population increase and provided a theme park size list of possible culprits. So each year, the suggestions for the cause of autism grew more preposterous. At some point, everything, and I mean everything, from vinyl flooring to the internet was blamed, and parent advocates and autism organizations alike each wanted every whim fully investigated by scientists. But before they could do that, they needed some more scientists, and they needed those scientists to focus on autism. And for that, they needed more money to attract researchers to the field. And to which all of that required more donations, more awareness, and definitely more legislation. Frankly, they just needed more of everything, absolutely everything, to save this generation of children. And they needed it yesterday. With such an intense population increase and no cure, these parents of autistics warned. They warned that this wasn't just a tragedy for them. Autism could kidnap anyone's child. And worse, oh, so ever much worse, if a cure for autism wasn't found soon, the next generation of humans would falter under the burden of caring for so many autistics. They warned that all of humankind would suffer autism then. This was a public health crisis. This was an impending epidemic. And oh my gosh, something had to be done. And it had to be done. It has to be done. It had to be done yesterday. Yeah. And whether or not they realized it, though I do believe the majority realized what they were doing actively, these parent advocates were able to strike a nightmare into the heart of the national conversation, control the narrative around autism, influence federal and state legislation, gain billions in research funding, launch many startups, and create the now booming by the billions autism market. Yep. Now I'm gonna wrap this episode up here, but continue the rest of this introduction in part 12. We are going to be in the 90s for a while. There is a lot that happened back then, and there's a lot that happened then that is very, 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 very much influencing and impacting our lives today. So more coming up, and thank you for joining me in another bit of autistic history.